going to go ahead and get started with the Land Bank's annual report. With me today at the table, I have Councilor Hogan, Councilor Codwell, Councilor Monso, Councilor Geathers, President Hudson, and Councilor Schultz, and myself, Councilor Allen. So Caitlin, what we'll do is just have you kind of start us off, go over a review. We can do this as informal as possible. If we want to ask questions during the report,
sure.
I know sometimes people wait until afterwards, but then you forget what you want to say. So
no, just feel free to jump right in.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
All right, thank you for having us here today. I'm Caitlin Wright with the Greater Syracuse Land Bank. As you know, Pat Hogan wears two hats and is also the chairman of our board, and I'm joined by Nancy Quigg and Oceana Fair, who are also on the Land Bank's board of directors here. So the New York State Land Bank Act requires us to come once a year to report to the foreclosing governmental units that created the land bank. So in our case, that's the City of Syracuse and Onondaga County. And we're supposed to report on the projects undertaken by the land bank during the past year, the monies expended by the land bank during the past year, and administrative activities of the land bank during the past year. So I did distribute a report to you guys last week on Friday. I hope you got a chance to glance through that. It's a lot of the same content that we presented at our annual meeting in January that I think many of you attended, and some of our board members were asking. We're also required to report to the state authority's budget every year by the end of March, and so a lot of the content for that is the same. It ends up just kind of getting reformatted for each report that we're required to present. So the high-level news of projects undertaken by the land bank in the past year: we acquired 123 properties. 108 of those were city tax foreclosures, and 14 this past year were ones that defaulted on their enforcement mortgages. As you know, when we sell a property, most of the time we're selling them as fixer-uppers with a scope of work attached, and the buyer is responsible to complete those renovations, usually within a year, sometimes longer if it's a more complex project. If at that year mark they aren't making any progress, they've done virtually nothing, we will send them a default notice, and usually if they acknowledge that there is no light at the end of the tunnel and they really don't have what it takes to do this project, they'll willingly give it back to us with something called a deed in lieu of foreclosure, so we don't end up having to go to court. And that's what all of those 14 were. There were just quite a few over the past few years that folks have purchased, not really realizing what they're getting into. Even though we do provide them with a scope of work up front, letting them know what is needed to bring it up to code. That includes an estimate of how much that work is going to cost. They have to show us that they have the skills themselves, or that they're hiring qualified contractors, and that they have the financing in place. But we had some buyers that just decided to throw in the towel and change their minds. We have not really aggressively gone after defaulted enforcement mortgages during 2020 and 21 because of COVID, because of some situations with the court not allowing us to go after those kinds of mortgage foreclosures. So we kind of have a backlog of defaulted ones that we're working on now, and that explains this spike. That said, there are quite a few folks who get to that 1 year mark and they're really making an effort. They might be 50% of the way done, 80% of the way done, and we don't want to foreclose on those. Those people have invested a lot of time and money and energy at that point. We want to see them finish. So we do grant extensions in those cases, and we try to do whatever we can to help folks get the resources they need to finish, whether that's additional loan funding, grants, hooking them up with qualified contractors if they're having a hard time finding contractors, whatever we can do to hold their hands to get them across the finish line, because we want to see people finish these homes. So that's the 123 that we acquired last year. We sold 103. So the year before was a record sales year. We sold more than we ever had before, and it was a significant drop for 2022, down to 103 sales. Our sales revenue did not drop as significantly, though. And I have some information in here about our average sales price on page 5 of the report. I did want to note that average is really pulled upwards by a couple of outliers. So there are 5 higher end sales that were $56,000 and higher that dragged that average upwards. So actually our median sales price for the year was only $9,900. So 75% of the structures we sold were sales price of $26K or lower. 50% of the structures we sold were $9,900 or lower. So that average number, kind of a misleading number. We have started to enter into sales contracts on a lot more properties that are firmly committed for the Resurgent Neighborhoods Initiative now. So at the end of 21, you saw that we had a lot of properties that were held for assembly pending or held for R&I. Now those are officially labeled sale pending. So the number of sale pending properties has increased significantly, and that's because we've entered into contracts with Housing Visions, Home Headquarters, and Jubilee Homes for a lot of these R&I new build sites. So that's just kind of, if you can imagine, we've got a large inventory of vacant lots. We're working on merging them together to make them buildable. As those resubs get finished and they are becoming shovel-ready sites and we're entering into contracts, they're just that, one step closer to construction actually starting.
A quick question. When you talk about the resubs, and talk about how you're selling them, are you selling them to individuals or are you selling them to developers?
Well, the resubs are mostly for the Resurgent Neighborhoods Initiative, so those are all going to be sold to affordable housing developers like Home Headquarters, Housing Visions, Jubilee Homes. I know there are more than that on the approved list because the city did recently do that RFQ for affordable housing developers for the Resurgent Neighborhoods Initiative, but that's typically who we're doing resubs for, is for affordable housing development.
In the neighborhoods, right?
Yes, yeah. You can see on page 6 of the report just exactly what I was describing there, how the number of sale pending has increased significantly. And a lot of people do wonder and express concern about the properties that the land bank is holding in its inventory. There's a table there on page 6 that breaks out what is the status of each of these properties. And rehab pending, or I'm sorry, a rehab candidate, a building that is considered salvageable but isn't yet listed, there are only 22 of those in our inventory. So I think a lot of people assume that we're sitting on a lot of these houses and not actively listing them for sale or not really doing much with them, but that's really not the case. The vast majority of our properties are either vacant lots that are for sale, there's just not a whole lot of demand for them, or they're listed for sale or they're under contract. There are not a lot of properties that are listable that aren't actually listed, and those that aren't are just working their way in that direction.
What's the criteria for you to actually list them?
Well, if it's a salvageable house, we try to list it as quickly as we possibly can. The only reason we wouldn't is we don't proactively list demolition candidates. And for it to be a demolition candidate, we go through with our construction manager and evaluate the condition of that building. And we're looking to see if there's significant fire damage, structural damage, water damage, things that would prevent somebody from being willing to take that on without significant subsidy available.
But once you demo it, then that vacant land goes back up for sale, right?
Yes. So if it's a very small lot and we don't have a possibility of combining it with an adjacent one to make a new construction site, then really the only thing that can be done with it is to sell it to one of the neighbors as a side lot. So we send a letter to both neighbors letting them know that it's available. If there is a possibility to combine it with an adjacent parcel to make a building site, or if it's already big enough on its own, then we prioritize those for new construction, particularly if it's within one of the R&I footprints that NBD has identified.
Do you have very many side lots on that north end? Because I know those are smaller houses, and when those houses come down, those lots aren't that big.
Yeah, so I would say probably a higher percentage of the buildings that we demolish up there end up becoming side lots because they are such small parcels. We are really trying to put together as many building sites as we can on the north side, but it has been a much bigger challenge to do so over the years because, like you said, they are much smaller parcels.
Caitlin, so can you, in contrast to that clickbait that the paper printed about you hoarding properties in certain parts of the city, can you actually explain what you're doing with those properties versus the word hoarding, which was there just to inflame?
Yeah, so we're a land bank. We're one of 26 land banks in the state, and land bank is a public entity created by local government to kind of assemble and triage vacant and abandoned properties. And so most of the time, we're going to try to get them listed as fast as we possibly can, like we do with the buildings that can be salvaged that are being bought by regular local individuals. But if there's a longer-term strategy to be pursued, like assembling it with the vacant lot next door, or multiple vacant lots together, or if it's in an area where there's a lot of change happening and we want to get together a plan first, then we will hold those and land bank them until we can put together that plan and market them to the appropriate developer. So the article was talking about the Blueprint 15 area, which initially started from Adams to MLK, Salina to 81. So it was a smaller footprint that we were approached about, and in 2020, Blueprint 15 contacted us and asked if we could hold all of the properties that we have in that area until they were done working on the plan for that neighborhood. They're working with the Housing Authority, and McCormick Barron Salazar was the Housing Authority's selected developer, to come up with a plan that they would use to apply for the HUD Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. And they did apply for that last year. They were not successful, and I understand they plan on applying again. Most of the SHA activity with McCormick Barron Salazar, I think, will be taking place north of the railroad tracks, and most of what we've acquired in that area is south of the railroad tracks. But we have one large piece, about an acre, at the corner of Montgomery and State, that is Burton State, I'm sorry. That's about an acre that we own some of it and SIDA owns some of it. We've done some demolitions there. We've done some phase 2 environmental testing. And right now it's zoned residential class B, but we're expecting after rezone, it'll be available for mixed use development. And so we're just waiting to see what happens with that and whether they get the Choice Neighborhoods grant and what happens with 81 before we list it for sale. Around the corner we have a small parcel that used to be an auto body shop. It's also zoned residential class B right now, so if somebody wanted to use it for something other than apartments, they would have to apply for a use variance. Again, I expect that zoning to change after rezone. And it's on such a small parcel of land that we were afraid if we tore it down, no one would ever want to build there, and it would probably just end up becoming an expansion of the parking lot for the church right next door there, Hops Memorial Church. And so rather than tear it down, we wanted to see that building saved. It did used to be an auto body shop. We have a grant from the EPA where we did a phase 1 environmental site assessment prior to taking title. They just did the field work for the phase 2, and we're waiting on that report to be finalized. And we used some ARPA money to put a new roof on that building. And I don't know if you can envision it, but it's a cool 1920s brick structure. It's got the big overhead doors because it was an auto shop. We could picture it being used for any number of things when it can get rehabbed. Office, retail, restaurant, something that could really be an amenity to the neighborhood. So we're doing the testing now so that we can figure out if any remediation is needed. Our consultants tell us worst case scenario, it might need a vapor extraction system, which is similar to a radon system. It's not too expensive to install. And then on the other side of that block on Rayner, there's a bunch of properties that are like, some are owned by us and then SIDA and the city, and it's kind of a checkerboard all in a row, but they are all collectively publicly controlled, and we're waiting on putting those out to bid until we see what happens with Blueprint 15.
Sounds like there's a plan.
So Blueprint asked us to do that. They're north of MLK. In that area, we're holding those and not listing them. Now, the Blueprint footprint has expanded since then. They now consider their footprint all the way down to Colvin and all the way west to the creek. And in that area, we've been working hand in hand with the Neighborhood and Business Development for the Resurgent Neighborhoods Initiative to get new housing built. That's where Home Headquarters just put up their 8 new single-family homes on Woodland, Baker, thank you, and Garfield. Those turned out great. It took us probably 5 or 6 years to put together those sites for them. It was 12 acquisitions, 9 demos, 6 resubs, and that sort of thing just is slow and tedious. But we're doing a lot more of that throughout the area. As a matter of fact, so we're not holding those because we want to see new affordable housing developed now.
Sounds like you're land banking, not hoarding.
Right. In that area, I have a list here for you. We're under contract to sell a cluster of properties at the corner of Midland and Colvin to Housing Visions. They're going to put up 5 two-family homes there. A cluster at the corner of Beard and Midland. They're going to put up another 5 two-family homes. And then on the 200 block of Beard, they have 2 more planned. Across the street on that same block, Home Headquarters has 2 single-family homes planned. One block south, Home Headquarters has 2 more single-family homes planned on Wood Ave. Where the Gothic Cottage used to be, we're under contract for them to build two-family homes there. On the back side of that block on State, where Woodland dead ends into State, and if you're standing in the front yards of all the homes they just built, you can see State right there. They're going to put up 5 single-family homes on State. And then one more, we're merging a couple properties together on the 300 block of Baker for them to build. And then the county is planning to put up 10 homes. It's a mix of singles and twos on Kennedy and Furman. So that's pretty much all the vacant land that we've been working on merging together in that blueprint footprint.
And all this you do in coordination, of course, with our and the neighborhood business development people and our aligned groups like Home Headquarters and the county, as a matter of fact, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then another quickie. I'm gonna jump to another side of town. I see you have 70. It says on the east side, because I haven't seen anything moving up there. So exactly
Yeah.
where on the east side?
Which page are you on?
Well, I jumped back.
Oh,
to
sorry.
5.
That is how many we have sold to date on the east side.
So what's going on the east side? Have we done any build up there anywhere?
We don't get a whole lot of foreclosures over there. The biggest project we have going on right now is the Syracuse Bread Factory building at the corner of Maple and Washington. You know, it's a big old factory. We're under contract with some local developers to buy that, and they're going to turn it into a mix of housing, office, and restaurant. And then across the street, we have 4 parcels that they're going to turn into parking. On the back side of that building, we have another former auto repair shop that we are doing some more environmental testing on. And then down the road on Fayette, there's a bakery. It wasn't Snowflake. What was the other bakery? It was Patrician's Bakery. And that just went on the market. It badly needs a new roof, and we'll see what sort of creative plan someone can come up with for that building.
That's part of the area I'm seeing in my head, because when you talk about that little corridor, we have across the street used to be the dry cleaners, so that's open. And then you have that old gas station that was on the corner right in front of the Boys and Girls Club. So none of that is being looked at for development?
Unfortunately, we don't own any of that. I think go ahead.
Michelle Spansky, Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood Development. The lot that is on the corner that you're talking about, that's right next to the Boys and Girls Club, that is one that we've prioritized for seizure. I think it was in the DEC agreement. So we are looking at it. It's just in that kind of middle area. We haven't actually been able to get it all the way over the finish line.
Okay, because I'm advocating for the east side. We need to do some housing on the east side.
We're right there with you.
Michelle, when you say siege, is this because it's like, are we taking it because of what?
Just we need to get it back into kind of productive use. It owes money on the taxes. It is a brownfield, so there's additional kind of challenges that we have with those to get them back in order. But yeah.
And then one quickie before you sit down. Either one of you can answer this, because if you go down Crowley, there's a ton of empty apartment space that they tore down. So are we utilizing that?
To my knowledge, those are not currently seizable lots right now. It is an area that we're looking at very strongly for the possibility of kind of strategic acquisition, if that's an opportunity that we might have. So yeah, it's similar to the north side in that it's a different type of development strategy that we have to take over there. That is not what's going to work is easily on the south side and the west side. Just don't work in the same way on the east side and the north side.
So all of that land that's coming up there where all the storefronts used to be, that's not owned by us. Is that what you're saying?
At this point, the majority of it is not.
Okay.
Yeah, we just have a few buildable parcels over there. So like this dense cluster that I'm describing between Colvin and Beard and Wood, we just can't achieve that on the east side. Now, we could do 1 or 2 houses here and there.
And I think the thing that's really important to kind of point out is that what we're learning just from kind of practicing it here, but also from the housing study, is it's really, really important that you do kind of comprehensive block unit development. So just doing kind of scattered shot 1 lot at a time isn't going to have the level of impact that we need. So it's a really frustrating answer for a lot of people, because to Caitlin's point, like, we're working on some of these things for 7, 8, 9 years between the time of assembly and finally getting new things developed. But it really has a difference in terms of kind of overall impact.
And I understand that, but I think that if we can start producing and showing some movement in those communities.
Certainly.
You'll start to build communities.
Certainly.
Other activities from last year, we had a record number of demolitions. We took down 94 blighted properties in 2022. You'll see that on page 8 of your packet. Like we said afterwards, we kind of go through this triage process to decide what happens with that vacant lot. Most of the time, these are selected based on their condition. So we are looking for the ones that pose the biggest safety hazard to the neighbors, and we want to address those first.
How many are you shooting for this year?
I think we'll probably be able to do 40 or 50. We don't currently have any demolition funding for this year secured. We are very pleased that for the first time ever, New York State included funding for land banks in their normal state budget this last year, but that was adopted last April, and HCR has just barely released the request for funding applications, so we applied for that a few weeks ago. I'm hoping that we'll hear soon and that money will start flowing soon. We applied for $2 million that they expect us to spend over an 18-month period. That would be about 1.25 for demolitions and $750,000 for building stabilization, basically mirroring what we did with the ARPA money from the city. So the city gave us $5 million. We used 3.8 for demos and 1.2 for building stabilization, and we were able to explain that in our application to HCR that we're ready to hit the ground running with their funding because we already have the program in place, we have the procurement processes in place to just keep going as if it's a continuation of ARPA.
So how many demo candidates do you have now total?
We have about 86 in our inventory right now.
And they're spread out?
Mostly on the south and west side, although they are all over the city. As far as brownfields go, we spent down the last of our $600,000 brownfield assessment grant from the EPA in 2022. With that funding, we were able to do 19 phase 1s, 13 phase 2s, and 1 hazardous building material survey for the Syracuse Developmental Center to help inform the RFP that the city's putting out for the demolition. And those are all sites that you're fairly familiar with. I was just explaining 917 Montgomery, that's there at the corner of Montgomery and Burt, the old auto repair shop. Patrick's Dry Cleaners is another one that we have not taken title to yet, but we were able to use the EPA money for a phase 1. When we ran out the rest of the funds in that grant, we had a handful of properties left where we had already done a phase 1, and now we needed to move on to the next step. And we were able to apply for their Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, where they'll fund one address at a time. And they have provided funding for the phase 2 at 917 Montgomery, for the phase 2 at Patrick's Dry Cleaners, that's currently ongoing, for the phase 2 at 322-26 Delaware Street. You probably recall that was a large brick building at the corner of Delaware and Grace. We were able to take that down with ARPA funding because the building was collapsing, and EPA followed right behind us and did the soil borings to do the phase 2, and we should have the report back from them soon. And also 541 Seymour, which you probably know is the Consolidated Industries building. It's about a 35,000 square foot warehouse on the west side that spans between Seymour and Shawnard. We will be doing phase 2 there this summer, and depending on what we find, then we'll be able to figure out what should our next step be. Is it going to be that we have to do so much soil remediation that the building needs to be demolished just so that we can clean the site, or can we rehab the building depending on what we find in the dirt, basically.
And so with a building that size, because I do know what you're talking about, so if we rehabbed it, what would that building be used for, possibly?
Excellent question. It's a very unusual building. We've had some conversations with Home Headquarters about the need for manufactured housing here in Syracuse. You know, with Micron coming, we need to put a significant number of additional housing units online. And our local contractors just cannot keep up with the volume that we need to achieve. And if we could build manufactured housing in a facility here in Onondaga County, we could put these houses up much faster. You wouldn't have to worry about the weather as much when you're building them indoors and then just dropping them on site. We think that that would be a great use for this building if the building can, in fact, be salvaged.
I have another question, and it's really not a question, just for the people that are listening that do not know what brownfields is. Can you just, I mean, we understand, but so they understand.
Though that's a good question. A brownfield is defined as any site that has environmental contamination or that has suspected environmental contamination. So sometimes it's just the unknown that is enough to scare away a potential developer. We have an old gas station at 900 South Ave that is considered a brownfield. Nobody's wanted to touch it for a long time, partly because it was $70,000 delinquent in taxes, so nobody was going to buy it. The owner was deceased, and the estate had not been probated, so there was no willing seller to sell it. So just by letting the city foreclose, we're able to get clean title. We were able to get access to the site then to do testing. We were able to determine that the tanks had been closed out in the 80s. There was a closure report filed with the DEC. Typically, the closure report is going to tell the DEC exactly how they were closed, were they removed, were they filled with concrete. We don't know why, but this report basically includes no information. And so we've had to do some investigation and go out there with an excavator to see if the tanks actually were still in the ground. There are 3 tanks. But now that we know all that, we have the answers to some of these questions, so a developer can tell, oh, well, it might cost me $50,000 to remove these tanks before we can even start redeveloping the property. So getting rid of the unknowns is the biggest step in the right direction that we can do with these brownfield properties. And luckily, we've been able to do that with the EPA's money.
And in essence, if we didn't have the land bank, that wouldn't happen. I mean, basically, that's the entity that would handle that.
And that's an example of...
We did some legislative maneuvering in order to escape the chain of liability, and that was something that was sort of prompted by the land bank in the city.
Yeah, there's been kind of a lot of that invisible work going on behind the scenes to make it possible for us to address these types of properties. Creating the land bank in the first place was able to separate the city from the liability a little bit in these types of situations, so we're willing to take on more risk and protect you guys. But with brownfields, the city just didn't want to enter the chain of title at all because there is potential liability for any past contamination that happened there. So we followed behind Suffolk County. Suffolk County created their land bank specifically to address brownfields. And they entered into an agreement with the DEC there where the DEC said, county and land bank in their case, since you guys are taking title to these, in order to get them cleaned up and returned to productive use, we will hold you harmless and indemnify you. And so we were able to copy that, and now a number of other counties across New York State have done that with their local DEC regions.
What about flood zones? Do you
That's an excellent question, and we don't really have a good solution for that. I wish I had the number for you. I can get you the number of exactly how many properties we have in the flood zone. It's been an incredible challenge, and I hate to demolish anything that appears to be a salvageable property, but we have a lot of situations where we'll sell it and our buyer will go to pull permits and be told, oh no, you have to fill in your basement and elevate the property 4 feet and move all your mechanicals up into the attic. And now what looked like a cost-effective renovation candidate is no longer a cost-effective project. However, what we've seen when we go to sell those is that sometimes that's what permits tells them, and sometimes they just get treated like a normal rehab. So it's a little bit unpredictable about what the permitting process is going to look like in the floodplain. It's been a little chaotic.
do you know why the difference of how it's being treated?
I suspect it may have something to do with how they're pulling their permits, if they're just doing one piece at a time, or if they go in for the overall renovation permit and it's obvious that this is a project of a much bigger magnitude. We have actually advised a lot of our buyers to only apply for one piece at a time because we think it'll make it easier for them. But it really doesn't, as far as I can tell, it's not as predictable as it should be, and it's aggravating for folks that already live there and own their homes in the floodplain, and we've got an eyesore building across the street from them that they don't want to look at. I think we need to start making some policy decisions soon about, are we just going to demolish everything that we have in the floodplain if it can't be cost effectively renovated?
Question
Go ahead.
about brownfields. So when you acquire these properties, do you have to have a plan to abate it before you acquire them?
We don't have to have a plan for the abatement per se, but we do need to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment before we take title. It has to be completed within 180 days before we take ownership. Otherwise, down the road, if I go to apply to the EPA for money for a phase 2 or for cleanup, then we would not be considered eligible.
Does that cost money to do that phase?
Phase 1's usually around $2,000 to $5,000 per property. The phase twos are much more expensive because then you get into actual soil borings and testing, and those are running around $80,000.
Do you ever acquire the property and then just sell it to someone else to do the abatement? And
Occasionally, yeah. The phase one will usually indicate that they suspect there's some more contamination here and we need to do further investigation. And so typically any potential buyer is going to want us to answer those questions before they're willing to dive in. Occasionally the phase one will come back and say there doesn't appear to be any real risk here, and in those cases, absolutely, it makes sense for us just to put it on the market and find a buyer.
do you ever have financial limitations that prevent you from doing phase one because of budget restraints?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're in between EPA grants. We've spent down our last one. We should find out within the next month whether we get another one. And if we are successful, that money won't start flowing until October 1st. And so we are kind of in an in-between phase where we're not taking on any new ones until we know if that grant comes through.
Still waiting on, you know what property on North Crouse?
Yes, Kraus and Burnett.
Has that started, phase one?
Please take it.
We have not started, exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, and because we don't have the grant money.
Then another question, maybe you, Michelle. Chester Street, I know there were houses that were still there. Those were in the flood zone, right? So
Yeah.
did we acquire those?
So depending on exactly what block of Chester you're on, there is a
Only two
decent.
houses.
Yeah, I was going to say a good chunk of that is floodplain. A lot of those lots, we've been working closely with the Parks Department, Steve Harris, to do kind of some strategic canopy investments and also kind of just like clean up in the area. So taking out all of the undergrowth and things that are not well maintained, elevating kind of clearance height. And the thought is that for some of those we would try to, particularly in the very, very floodplain area, that we would try to keep that as green space.
Okay, so those 2 or 3 houses that's there, we're not doing anything with those.
I would need to check kind of what the status is. To my knowledge, those are not ones that are seizable yet. So we can double check that and get back to you.
There is one on that block that we currently own that is kind of on my short list of ones that need to come down because like you said, the only likely outcome on that block is that it's going to be permanent green space.
To Councilor Schultz's issue, Kraus and Burnett, is that, do we seize that or not? Have we seized that?
We're working on trying to get it. The problem is, from my understanding, that there's still some getting like into the agreement kind of phase of it that we're working through. So we have not been able to bring it forward to you guys. We can't bring a property forward to you to vote on until it's fully authorized to be within the DEC agreement because of the title issues.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. The indemnification agreement from the DEC that was really groundbreaking for us, it only applies to a specific list of properties that are attached as an Exhibit A. And that list can be revised from time to time, but right now those 3 properties are not on the list, and we're working to get them added. We need them to be added to that list, and we also need this EPA grant so that we can move those into the pipeline.
Thank you.
But all that brownfield work is another example of land banking where we have some properties that are in our inventory that are not actively for sale because we're still doing research or testing or working on merging them with adjacent parcels before they get listed.
Hey, Caitlin, before you go on, and you might have this already in your report, but as far as the houses that are on the land bank that we know needs to be boarded up and cleaned up, what are we doing for that project this summer?
If they're owned by the land bank?
Yes, like as far as cleanup. I know at one point there was money and funding that you were having, somebody go by, board them and clean them.
Well, we do that all the time, yeah. So actually, the city gave us $750,000 in this current fiscal year that is limited to property maintenance. And so we're using that money for lawn mowing, for trash pickups, for board ups, for tarping roofs where it's needed, occasionally for shoveling sidewalks, although we got very little snow this winter. And so we have an inspector that goes around. He's on a 2-month cycle. He'll see every single one of our properties. So we've got about 900 properties in our inventory, and he's proactively checking on those, and he has a mobile phone app where he'll upload a picture if we need to go pick up trash or board it up or do whatever. But really, we see them much more frequently with our own full-time staff that are out in the field every day. They get reports from neighbors and from code enforcement, and then themselves just out proactively monitoring our properties. We do our own board ups in-house, and we have an MBE contractor that does all of our trash removal, and MBE contractors that do all of our lawn mowing, and we also utilize Catholic Charities Project Joseph to do some yard maintenance and cutting back overgrowth. This time of year, they're out right now identifying all the sites that we know tend to get overgrown with a lot of shrubs, and it's more than just lawn, it's really overgrowth. And now's a good time of year to start cutting that back before it gets out of control. So we're working on that with Catholic Charities right now. And as far as monies expended this year, this was really another year where we basically broke even. Our financial statements are right here in your packet, and you can see everything that we've spent funding on this year. A lot of it ARPA funded and EPA funded for our various grant programs. Any questions on?
You have a huge staff, don't you, Caitlin?
We have
What do you have, 5?
8 full-time people.
8 full-time people. I was just
Are you
wondering.
going to be able to keep him after ARPA?
Yeah, we did not add any staff for ARPA. Yeah, so I'm not worried about that.
And I want to mention that a lot of times our people, the land bank people work with DPW, work with codes, quite a bit out there. It just happens. And then the new police department, E.J. Donovan, who does the environmental justice. Well, I don't know what they call it. Environmental.
CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design.
And he's been very involved, too, in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, our team is in close communication all the time with police and fire and code enforcement and DPW, addressing all of these issues out in the field.
So Caitlin, how many rentals does the land bank have?
Right now, we probably have four or five that are paying rent. Quite a few more that are occupied that we're not in leases with. We have seen the number of occupied properties significantly increase since foreclosures ramped up now after COVID and after the eviction moratorium ended. We do our best to give those folks the first opportunity to purchase, and we have probably 5 or 6 right now that are in that process where we're getting the house appraised and working to get that buyer mortgage qualified. We try to work with home headquarters to roll any necessary renovations into that loan, so they might be borrowing for both the purchase and a new furnace or a new roof.
Because I really don't think that you guys want to be landlords.
We definitely do not want to be landlords. And we only enter into leases in situations where we know somebody's going to need a little time to get mortgage qualified. We've occasionally had situations where folks just want to stay through the end of the school year, so we'll do a lease in that situation. But the best case scenario is if the occupant at the time of foreclosure can purchase the house. And it seems like that is becoming more and more common. And actually, we were invited along with the city to participate in a program by the Center for Community Progress this year called their Make It Home initiative. The Rocket Mortgage Foundation in Detroit funded this pilot program there to help folks who are in homes facing tax foreclosure to both purchase and renovate their homes. And so we were invited to participate in this 6-month-long learning exchange where they had 13 communities across the country on Zoom meetings, learning from technical experts who have done this before. And now the Rocket Mortgage Foundation is going to be opening up a grant opportunity for a few of us to apply for funds that'll help with the renovations. And that seems to be the biggest barrier is if somebody wants to buy the house, but there are so many repairs that it needs that they can't possibly finance all of them. So we're hoping that we can use some of this grant funding to deal with those capital projects and the repairs that are needed. And also, I'm thinking probably to fund some outreach to reach people who are in the homes leading up to the time of foreclosure, because a lot of people assume that they just have to leave. Well, if it's your landlord that's being foreclosed on, there's not necessarily any reason why you have to be displaced. So we want to get out there and do more education prior to the foreclosure, make sure that folks know that they have this opportunity available, get them into the Financial Empowerment Center sooner rather than later. And we're really optimistic about that, and we'll be learning more about that grant program soon.
One more, then I'm going to be quiet.
No, that's okay.
I know that a lot of these properties, because I called you about one over on Onondaga, and when these people are gone, there's stuff in the building. So are some of these things salvageable, and what do you do with them?
When we get a foreclosed building, so the city is foreclosing and conveying to us the real property, which does not include any personal property inside the building. So we always send a letter to the last known address of the owner, letting them know that, you know, the property's been foreclosed on, but if you have any personal property inside, please contact us to make arrangements to get it out. Occasionally, these homes have building materials and tools inside of them because they might have been mid-renovation. Occasionally, they have furniture and other personal property. Very rarely does anybody respond to those letters and take us up on the offer to get inside and get their stuff out. I think it's probably because the last known address we have is the last known tax billing address, and it's possible that they're not forwarding their mail anymore, but we really have no other way to reach folks. But that's what we try to do. We hope that their mail is getting forwarded.
So I know the majority of it you probably scrap, but then there's probably some of it that has a value to it.
The vast majority of stuff that's in the houses is really garbage, and so we have a debris removal company that goes in and cleans them out. If there's anything salvageable, furniture that can still be used, we do work with Interfaith Works and Catholic Charities to have them come take that stuff because they do use it for refugees that they're resettling. So if there's anything that's salvageable like that, we try to make sure that it just doesn't go to the dump.
You don't auction it?
Well, there's very little that's of any meaningful value. We have occasionally found things that I'm sure have sentimental value to folks, photo albums, awards, things like that. And our staff does a pretty good job of grabbing those and setting them aside. And we've actually worked with Syracuse History a lot to try to reach out and find the families that they belong to. And he has a fairly good success rate of finding who this stuff goes to.
What's the pot of money that you stand to collect for that program you mentioned, the Center for Community?
We don't know yet. We've just been told that there's going to be this opportunity available. We're supposed to be having a call, I think, next week with them to learn more about it. So unfortunately, it's very new. All right, any other questions here? We've attached our financial statements and our certified audit because we just got through our audit process. That has to be reported to New York State by the end of March every year. Jimmy, did it look like there were some questions down on your end about our financials?
I don't think so.
We did break even this year, but I do want to stress that the only reason we were able to break even was because of the significant amount of financial support that we got from the city. And I know we're going to be coming in later this week for our budget hearing, but that $750,000 that we could use for property maintenance is the entire reason why we were able to break even at this point. We have enough money in our fund balance right now to cover 9 months of operating expenses if there was, a dire emergency and we didn't have any other source of funding coming in. Generally speaking, we make enough on real estate sales each year to cover about half of our operating expenses, but the other half we really do rely on financial support from the city and the county. New York State is, for the first time now, making grant funding available to land banks, but it's usually for specific deliverables. They want to see that we've done X number of building stabilizations, X number of demolitions. They typically do not want to fund things like property maintenance, trash pickup, lawn mowing, that are necessary for some of these projects where we're doing longer-term land banking.
So that's our investment, or $45 million in private investment, plus, what's the tax revenue again? From 2021.4 million.
Yeah, we feel confident that, even though we're asking the city for this financial support every year, that you are definitely making more than that back in terms of properties we've returned to the rolls are paying about $2 million a year in property taxes. And because before the land bank existed, people knew you were not going to foreclose. When the city would send out tax foreclosure notices, they knew that you weren't going to have an auction, and so your collection rate was much lower. Now that the land bank exists and you can send those notices out and you're not crying wolf anymore, the city's collected like $21 million more of delinquent taxes above historic levels since the land bank was established.
If you were unlucky enough to live next to a tax delinquent, dilapidated house back pre-land bank, that house would remain there unless somebody would buy it or catch on fire or just degrade the stability of that neighborhood further. And that's exactly the way it was. I mean, I remember, maybe President Hudson remembers when the Driscoll administrations had an auction. So you sold houses for $1, and somebody show up and look at it, and it's still
Somebody
stay
in
there.
Illinois.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't a really pleasant thing to be a city councilor in those days when you get calls, because we couldn't do anything. The city literally didn't do anything. Couldn't afford to do it. Land bank was created.
Yeah, obviously the auctions were not a great thing, and selling tax liens to ATFS also was not a great thing for our community. We're selling control to some debt collection company in Florida. So, yeah,
That's where they sold my lot to, and I had already paid my taxes.
you know, it's not a perfect system, and I think that we could be doing more to go after these buildings even faster, but it's certainly a big improvement over the way things used to be.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. I'd like to thank all their staff, too. I see Mr. Sid and Mr. Doherty there who aid us in our endeavors. Land Bank. It's been a pleasure serving as chairman.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions or comments, we can end this committee meeting. And thank you, Caitlin.
And I have a side question.
Gotta add this.